Okay, let's begin. So the topic of this video is communicative competence. This is a very important concept in second language acquisition. So if you're not familiar with this, please try to understand it. Okay, so to begin with, let me talk a little about this distinction between competence and performance. This was introduced by Noam Chomsky, very famous linguist, perhaps the most important linguist in the world. So he distinguished between linguistic competence and linguistic performance. So linguistic competence consists of the mental representations of linguistic rules that constitute the speaker-hearer's internal grammar. Here, linguistic competence is maybe defined in a very difficult way, but I'm going to talk about this in more detail later. In contrast, linguistic performance consists of the use, so this is an important point, use of this grammar in the comprehension and production of language. So competence is a kind of internal grammar. So it is the grammar in us, internal to us. So when we say competence, we are talking about this mental grammar in our mind, in our brain. And when we speak, when we produce language, we use this grammar, and this production part, this is performance. And we use our mental grammar to comprehend language, and this comprehension is also performance. So Chomsky distinguished our mental grammar and the use of that grammar, which is production and comprehension. Okay. And theoretical linguists like Chomsky, they mainly study native speakers' linguistic competence. So what they are concerned with is things like these: phonology, lexicon, morphology, and syntax. And maybe you are already familiar with these types of knowledge. So phonology is concerned with pronunciation, lexicon is concerned with vocabulary, morphology is about the grammar to form words, and syntax is about the grammar to form sentences from words. And theoretical linguists, they study these, and these are in the mind of a native speaker. And actually, theoretical linguists usually don't study linguistic performance. So theoretical linguists don't study this or this. They study this. Okay? So they think this is very important. And actually, that's also reflected in how we teach a foreign language. So for example, in countries like Japan, teaching English as a foreign language focuses mainly on linguistic competence. So what we teach is these: vocabulary, pronunciation, and grammar. So these. We don't use these technical terms, phonology, lexicon, morphology, syntax. We use simpler terms like vocabulary, pronunciation, grammar. But these are the same thing as these. So not only theoretical linguists, but also teachers of English as a foreign language often consider these as very important. But if we have these types of knowledge in our minds, Is that enough? Can we communicate well? Well, actually, the answer is simply no. So, this person called Hymes, he's a social linguist, not theoretical linguist. Maybe he's also a theoretical linguist, but his concern is a bit different from Chomsky's concern. So I think he was concerned more about social aspects of language use, and he coined that term. So he made this new term, communicative competence. So he thought it is not enough to have linguistic competence. In order for us to use language or to communicate, so we need more than that. So for example, we have to speak in a socially appropriate manner to communicate well. So grammaticalness and social appropriateness are not the same thing. They're different. And the notion of communicative competence was expanded by these people, by these researchers. So according to them, communicative competence has these subtypes of competence: grammatical competence, sociolinguistic competence, discourse competence, and strategic competence. And first, grammatical competence is actually what Chomsky calls linguistic competence. So this is competence in a narrow sense. So here we are talking about knowledge of phonology, lexicon, morphology, and syntax. Okay? And this is necessary for communication, for us to communicate. So they are not saying that grammatical competence is not necessary. They still think that this is an important part of communicative competence, but they are also saying that this is not enough. So even if the learner has this competence, it doesn't mean that they can communicate well. And what is sociolinguistic competence? So this is the ability to use language appropriately in a social context. So for example, please look at this sentence: open the window. So this is actually grammatical, open the window, grammatical, but this is not appropriate to say to senior people who are older than you. And if you are a student, you shouldn't say this to your professor. That's very rude, I think. So you should speak in a socially appropriate manner. So for example, if you are talking to a senior person, maybe you can say, could you please open the window? Or maybe you should open the window yourself. So this is not really about the grammar. So this sentence is also grammatical, but this is not socially appropriate if you say this to senior people. And what is discourse competence? So in normal speech, we combine multiple sentences, 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, I don't know, many sentences. Even if each sentence is grammatical, the speech as a whole may not make sense if the relation among the sentences is not right. So please look at these 3 sentences. Please look at each of these 3 sentences. Yesterday I went shopping. Is this grammatical? Maybe yes. What did you buy? Is this grammatical? Or maybe yes. My brother watched football. Is this grammatical? Or maybe yes. My brother watched football. I think this sounds okay to me. But actually, if you read all 3 of these, the connection here is not right, I think. And so person B says, what did you buy? And person A says, my brother watched football. This is not the right kind of answer to B's question. So here we have a very strange discourse. Okay. And what is strategic competence? Strategic comes from the word strategy. Strategy here means a technique to solve problems in a conversation. So for example, if you can't think of a word, you try to express the concept in simpler words without ending the conversation. So this is an example of a strategy. So let's say you want to talk about an elephant, but you just can't remember the word elephant. So in that case, of course, you may choose to stop talking about it. You can do so, but I think that's not good. So maybe you can say something like, what do you call this in English? It's a large gray animal with a long nose and big ears. If you say this, I think your listener will understand what you want to say. Okay, so even here you can't remember the word elephant, but I think you can get your message across if you say something like this. And maybe if you're talking to a native speaker, he or she will tell you the word elephant. So now let me give you some examples of communication strategies. So here communication strategies are strategies that second language learners use when they want to express something but do not have the best linguistic resources to express it. So in this example, the best way to express the concept is to use the word elephant, but you just can't remember the word elephant, so you try to use other resources. And for example, you can use this technique called circumlocution. Circum means circle and locute means speak. So this is to explain using many words. Using many words, you explain a concept that can usually be explained in one or few words. So if you want to talk about an elephant, you can describe it by using the word elephant, just one word. Okay, but here because you can't remember the word elephant, here you use many words. Okay, this is circumlocution. So here, because you cannot go to the concept that you want to express in a straight line, it's like you are going around the concept that you want to express. You can't go to that concept in a straight line. Instead, you're going around it. That's circumlocution. And here is a real example from this person's book. So so she says, so she's talking about her friend. While living in Colombia, a friend of mine wanted to buy some silk. Okay, and obviously this friend of hers, this friend didn't know much Spanish. People in Colombia speak Spanish. So this friend went into the local shop. So this friend wanted to buy some silk. So this friend went into the local shop and says something like the following, in Spanish, I think. So So this friend didn't know the Spanish word for silk. So this friend instead said something like this in Spanish. It's made by little animals for their house and then turned into material. Okay, so this person didn't know Spanish words for silk or silkworm. Silkworm is an insect that produces silk. And cocoon is their house. If I borrow this. So, but he or she explained the concept using the words he or she knew. Okay. And here we have a second type of communication strategies. So these are called interactional strategies. They are strategies used for negotiation of meaning between speakers. So that is to obtain mutual understanding, okay, to understand each other. So, and here we have some examples. Actually, there are many interactional strategies, but here we have only 3 of them. So repetition request. So for example, you can say pardon, sorry, or say it again, please. So you are asking the speaker to repeat what he or she has just said. Okay, and clarification request. What do you mean by that? And confirmation request. Did you say, I don't know, blah blah. And these can be very useful, especially when a non-native speaker doesn't understand what a native speaker said. Okay? So if we don't understand what a native speaker has just said, we can say pardon, sorry, or say it again, please. And they are useful. I believe they are very useful. These strategies, they are very useful, but they are not taught. So most Japanese learners, second language English, do not know communication strategies. So when they speak English and when they don't understand how to express something in English, they tend to say, なんて言うんだろう in Japanese. And sometimes they even give up saying that thing in English. That's a big pity, I think. And when they listen to English, and when they can't understand what a native speaker said to them, they pretend that they could understand it, even though they couldn't. So without saying pardon, they just pretend that they could understand what a native speaker said. But that's also bad. If they negotiate for meaning, they can get comprehensible input from the native speaker in many cases. Maybe not all the time, but in many cases they can get comprehensible input. So in that kind of case, the native speaker that they are talking with will say the same thing in a simpler manner. So so these people, Canale Swain, they proposed these components of communicative competence. So here we have four components of communicative competence, and other researchers have proposed many new versions of communicative competence. So so this set is the original version proposed by these researchers, but other researchers have proposed different versions of communicative competence. And actually many new components have been added to communicative competence, and actually it is not possible to introduce all of them, and I think it is not so meaningful to do so. So let me talk about just this, psycholinguistic competence. I think this is quite important when we talk about communicative competence in countries like Japan. So what is psycholinguistic competence? As I told you before, linguistics or theoretical linguistics is concerned with the mental grammar of native speakers. But psycholinguistics is concerned with the psychological processes involved in the use of that mental grammar. So use here means performance or comprehension and production. So for example, when you produce language, many psychological processes are taking place in your mind, and broadly speaking, there are three major steps: pre-verbal conceptualization and linguistic formulation and sound articulation. Okay, so pre-verbal here means before language. So at this stage, you have a message that is not yet language. So let's say you want to express this situation. Okay, so this is the message that you want to express, and this is and at this stage you have just this situation in your mind, and it hasn't been expressed in language yet. So it's pre-verbal. you have a pre-verbal concept in your mind, and the next thing you do is to give it a linguistic form. So the first thing you have to do is to select words to describe this situation. Maybe you need words like boy or study. So because here a boy is studying, and then you arrange words into a sentence, and you get something like a boy is studying. But this is not the end of the story. Then you have to turn this sentence into sound information. So something like this. But this is not the sound itself. This is still linguistic information. And you give this sound information maybe not to your mouth, maybe actually to the part of the brain which controls your mouth, maybe. So based on this sound information, you move your mouth and you produce sounds, produce the actual sounds. So articulation is the action of saying something. Okay, so these are the psychological processes involved in language production. And what is important here is that these psychological processes have to take place automatically if you want to communicate smoothly. So we have several steps, not just one, we have several steps, and these steps must take place automatically. So so automaticity is very important here if you want to communicate smoothly. Okay? So automaticity in production is quite important. So for smooth communication, language production must take place automatically, because we cannot keep our listeners waiting forever. We just can't do it. However, typical Japanese speakers' production of English lacks automaticity. So when they try to speak, they can't find words, they can't produce sentences fluently, so they lack automaticity. So that's a very, very big problem. And many Japanese speakers, many Japanese learners of English have this problem. So psycholinguistic competence is the ability to use language automatically. And here, language use is regarded as a skill, not knowledge. And we'll become able to use our second language automatically only through using it, only through practicing using it. So if you think about playing the piano, we'll never be able to play the piano by just listening to the piano. So if you see someone playing the piano, and if you listen to that piano play, even if you do that, you'll never be able to play the piano yourself. You have to practice playing the piano. You have to play the piano to be able to play the piano. It's the same thing. So if you want to become able to use your second language automatically, you have to practice using it. That's the only way you can become able to use your second language automatically. You have to practice using it. You have to use it. And here we have some educational implications. So first, we should not ignore grammatical competence. Of course, this is important, but we should also know the other components of communicative competence, such as sociolinguistic competence, discourse competence, and strategic competence. They are also very important. And we should nurture learners' strategic competence by teaching communication strategies. Learners don't know communication strategies, so we need to teach them. And also, we should nurture their psycholinguistic competence by having them actually use their second language. And here, trainings like shadowing are also effective. So we can use this as well. And and in countries like Japan, grammatical competence has been emphasized traditionally. So we've been paying a lot of attention to grammatical competence already. So this competence has been emphasized enough, I think. And what about this? I mean, actually, there is less emphasis on these, but these will be okay. You actually get better at these. These types of competence, they grow naturally. So, I mean, personally, I think we don't have to pay too much attention to these. But in these two types of competence, people like Japanese are very weak. And I think these should be emphasized more. So we should pay more attention to these. And we should teach students or learners in such a way that they will acquire these two types of competence. And that is not happening yet. So I think these are important. These are the references. Thanks for listening.